You're listening to The Streaming Wars, the podcast that discusses all of the latest happenings regarding your favorite streaming services. Find out which service is winning the war this time around.
Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of The Streaming Wars. I'm Dustin and Tony is with me and we're here to discuss everything from July 29th through August 4th. We have a bunch of news, we've got Emmy nominations, we've got some big news when it comes to Universal and AMC, outside of the general streaming world that we typically talk about. So let's get into the news first before we get to those larger discussions. First up with Netflix, the animated series Captain Fall has landed at Netflix. Netflix has added a number of classic comedy series with black leads, including Sister Sister, Moesha, Girlfriends. Netflix has ordered a docuseries focusing on the global sporting scandals from the same producers that made Don't F With Cats. Netflix has made a major investment in the Black Mirror Creators production company, and this is kind of a first of its kind specifically because this one the investment that they made implies that eventually they could take it over from the creators if they choose to leave. There's also a Beyond Good and Evil movie adaptation, which is a video game from Ubisoft that is actually going to be adapted at Netflix. And then there's another video game project. Netflix has added a Splinter Cell anime series to the growing number of video game adaptations. Now, obviously, there's a lot of video game adaptations. The thing is, when this Splinter Cell one, this joins an ever-growing number. We heard recently Prime Video is doing a Fallout series with the creators behind Westworld. There's a lot of video game properties that are being adapted. Now, we've seen movies made in the past, and they typically have not had the best of luck, but it seems that television, and more specifically when it comes to Netflix, these anime series that feature the video game properties, they're the ones that are really going to be, in some ways, taking off because of the amount of money that's being thrown around.
I think it's kind of cool. I just remember playing the Splinter Cell games and reading some of the books, and so I think it's going to be cool to kind of like see that universe come to life and to enjoy that. It's probably the same feeling that some fans of like comics when they read the comics and they have this like version of events in their head and then they watch these big movies that come out and it's like, okay, like it's kind of cool to see some of those things that were in their head or in the book or something that come to life. So I'm excited about this, but I think it's also interesting to see like different drive for content, I guess, or like drilling for content where different studios are tapping different holes, and it's interesting, the different wells, and it's interesting to see this trend kind of go. Like at first it was, it's always kind of been, but even more so like I remember Amazon giving people deals on books that haven't finished yet or about to start and stuff like that. So you start with books, and then podcasts got really big for a while. I remember Amazon and Netflix were signing on different podcasts and kind of taking those over and doing stuff with that. And then now it's going down the well of video games. And so I think that's cool. I think it's interesting how the search for stories and content is kind of going across all mediums, and I think streaming is allowing that to happen and allow different types of stories in different formats. So I think that's great. I think that's kind of like one of the biggest pluses in streaming is the fact of grabbing these stories from all these different mediums and being able to tell them in a way that's unencumbered by advertising or advertising partners or studio executives or just like the traditional TV drama that happens with trying to get stuff out the door. It's allowing that creative freedom to kind of flow through and build what you want. So that's why this is kind of cool to see in this new trend between Netflix and Amazon with the Fallout series. I'm personally waiting for some streaming service to get the rights to Halo for Microsoft and develop that. I think that would be pretty cool because that would be a pretty awesome series that you could do. And Amazon or Apple or somebody has the money to do it very well. So if I can just request the powers that be out there, it'd be nice to see Halo. But overall, this is really cool for Netflix, and it's really exciting.
And then the other big story for Netflix this past week is that if you remember if you've been listening to the show for a long period of time, you may remember us talking about this. I want to say it was like November-ish, December, I want to say. And at the time, the announcement was that Netflix they were beta testing the idea of having playback speeds so you could watch things at a faster rate. So basically, you could get through shows much quicker because you could watch them at 1.5. So you could get through things. So if a thing was an hour long and you watched it at 2, obviously, it's only going to be 30 minutes to actually get through it. There was a huge pushback from the creative community. There was actors and directors who spoke out against this, who said that this is a really bad idea. Clearly, Netflix listened for a little bit and then decided, no, we're going to do it anyway, because they have now rolled that feature out for Android users. So if you are using an Android device and you actually are then watching Netflix on it, you now have the ability to use the playback speed option. Now, what makes this even more unique is the fact that that this is already happening. But the implications for that this does is that means more individual content can be consumed by a viewer on Netflix if they're using these playback speeds. Now, that also means that you could potentially boost the amount of people who are watching content, because instead of watching one show in an hour, you could watch 2 shows at 2 times speed in 1 hour. So the thing is, that's an interesting implication. There's also a bunch of other reasons that it's probably not great. The creative community, of course, is still not liking this, but that's where it's at. Netflix at this point has said, well, we appreciate your opinion, but we're doing it anyway.
I sympathize with the creative community because I understand that they want to protect their craft. However, I don't see why this is going to be a big deal, because people already do this with different forms. I think podcasts are kind of the biggest example of people who will, in audiobooks, I'll include them as well, as listening to that content at multiple X the speed. I mean, the podcast app I use automatically takes out the silences in the podcasts, which is kind of nice, but then I also listen to it at 1.5 to 2x so that I can get through all the content as fast as possible. I don't feel like I'm losing out on that experience. And I think for a lot of people, there's a lot of content out there that I think could be shortened down, and shortened down in the way of not less, but it can go through faster. And I'm thinking maybe documentaries or kind of exposés, crime, true crime. You can definitely speed up that content where the pacing isn't off. It's just, it goes by a little bit faster and it's not going to feel off. And I don't think that that's going to be that big of an issue. And they put some soft caps on the speeds too. It's you can speed it up to at most 1.5x. So I mean, that's really, people can tell that there's a difference, but there's not that drastic of a difference. And in fact, TVs, cable companies have been doing this for a while. When they release a movie that's on TV, in order to make it fit in their cute, pretty little time windows, they will cut out certain parts of the movie, pauses or whatnot, and then they will also speed up the movie. That was an interesting trick I heard them use. So they'll speed it up a little bit. So it's maybe 1.2 or something, where it's a little bit faster in terms of pace, but it's not noticeable enough. If you watch the movie in theaters and then you watch it on TV, it doesn't feel that different. So this isn't really that new. And I think it's kind of, people are making it more of a story than it actually is. It's starting off on just mobile phones. So it's starting off on Android, and then it's going to go to iOS devices. I'm curious how that reception is going to be between those two communities. And, viewing stuff mobile is a lot different than it being on a TV, because you're usually with mobile, you might be doing something else, or you're in the middle of in a transition moment. So you're going to from home to work or something kind of crazy from that. So I think it's very dependent on what the properties are and kind of what those people are going to be doing in those moments, to where is there going to be a negative net benefit. I'm curious though, as someone who has Android, Dustin, and I know that you got Android devices, is this something that you would find interesting? Would you utilize this feature?
So I could see myself utilizing the feature for certain types of content. For the high quality dramas and comedies that I watch, I probably wouldn't use it. But the documentaries, I could definitely see the ability to using it. The issue is that as of right now, the Android devices that I have are just going to be tablets and phones. I don't tend to watch a lot of content on those devices. The concern I have is that I don't think long-term I would use it that frequently. I'm sure there are people who would definitely use it. I just don't see there being a lot of people who are going to be using it.
Yeah, that seems to be kind of the same consensus with YouTube. You can change the playback speeds on YouTube videos. And I do that sometimes when it's people are showing me a 10-minute video and they want me to get through it really quick. And I will just go on 1.5 to 2x and try to get through that content. But if I'm really something I'm trying to pay attention to or listen, I will just slow it down. And most of the time I do forget. It's only when I'm in a rush or something where I try to utilize that feature. And so since it's going to be kind of not it's not going to be super hard to access, but those controls are not pause and then go skip right, skip left. You have to go through a sub menu or two. So there's a little bit of purposeful friction there so that people don't automatically. You just have that as a default setting setting where you just watch everything as 2x. So I think that people are just making this to be more than what it is, but just wait to see, because Netflix captures a lot of metrics and data on how people use the apps and stuff. So I'm kind of curious over the long term, like 6 months after they release these features on iOS and Android, how when they get those numbers, what those say, and how often do people actually use this feature, and what does that say about people viewing media in the industry in the future. So I'm curious when that time comes, but right now it's I think some creatives are just being a little bit overly careful.
All right, so moving on, we have nothing for Prime Video, we have nothing for Hulu. CBS All Access, the SpongeBob SquarePants spinoff that was originally slated for Nickelodeon has now shifted over to CBS All Access. It's called Camp Corral. That's moving over to the service in the future, as well as CBS All Access has added a ton of Viacom CBS content, specifically from MTV, BET, Comedy Central, ahead of their expansion that's coming early next year.
Yeah, I think that this is really cool about CBS All Access and Viacom. I cannot wait till the merger happens and the official name of their launch, so that we could just say one name, because I kind of feel like I'm just saying a whole bunch of syllables when I say CBS All Access and Viacom. Like it's just it feels like a lot. But the point of what I'm trying to say is I'm really excited about their approach, and it's like very slow and methodical. They talked a few months ago how CBS All Access, we feel good about the product, but now we're going to graduate it. We're going to combine it with all of the power of Viacom, and it's create this one streaming service that will just have everything going forward. And I was like, okay, that's really cool. It's really exciting for the service. And then instead of doing a whole drastic rewrite and a whole drastic name change and stuff like that, where there's a lot of confusion, they're kind of doing this slow transition. And I appreciate that. So I like how they've added more content just to see how people are going to feel about it. But then I also like how they're doing just a rebrand of the user interface to get their loyal customers as they move and switch over to the Viacom CBS offering are going to have that familiarity with the app, and it's not going to feel kind of foreign to them. I think that a little bit of HBO Max's issue is not necessarily that the app is that drastically different from HBO Now or HBO Go. It's the fact of like there was just this big name change, and all of a sudden people's apps automatically updated to Max instead of what it was before, and there's a little bit of brand confusion there. And I think that if you want to make sure that your previous customers are happy and you want to include those numbers as a solid base of your relaunch, that you need to target them. So I think having this kind of like soft reboot right now is a really smart idea, and to iron out a lot of the kinks for when the official version of the new Viacom CBS offering comes out, that it's fully baked. There's no issues. Like there is a positive user experience scores when they deal with the interface and stuff like that. So I think this is really, really cool. And I really appreciate how Viacom Viacom CBS is really taking the slow approach here, and not just, hey, we're doing all this at once, this new thing. We're taking, here's the steps to get from where we are to where we want to go. And they are, and it seems like they're doing those. And I appreciate that type of leadership.
All right, jumping over to Apple TV Plus, Leonardo DiCaprio's production company has signed a first look deal with Apple. We also have a link that was a tweet by Brendan Brady that showcases all of the deals that have actually been put in place at Apple. There's a lot of production deals, first look, exclusives that have been put in place. I would strongly check that out, but there is a ton of content that has yet to be, that has yet to materialize based on all of these deals, but it does bode well for the future.
Yeah, I had the same outlook when I read this chart. I was looking at the table, and 2018 they had about 6 or 7 deals that they signed. 2019 kind of the same, 6, 7. But then this year there were already as of recent there were 8 deals for 2020, and it's just the beginning of August of 2020. So obviously there's going to be more deals that happen throughout the year, and so it just shows that as Apple is growing and they have grown, they realize kind of their needs now is that they're signing more deals. So that's pretty cool and encouraging. And Leonardo DiCaprio, I mean, he chooses great projects and is a big name, and he's going to have a net positive at the end of the day at Apple. So that whole deal is good, and I'm excited about that. But I do agree that, my first take was, okay, like look at already as year to date, they've done 8 deals. Previous years, they've done it 6, 7, now 8, and it's already 2020. Seeing that chart, I was like, I'm looking back through the names of the creators, and I can't remember that many big projects from them. And so it's good that you kind of had the same type of concerns, because I'm looking at this list and it's like they signed a lot of really interesting and cool, producers, writers, executives, like really excited about. They keep signing all these exclusive deals and it looks really interesting. But looking at like the content that's been produced, it feels like they haven't really produced much. Is that kind of a very narrow viewpoint, or is it just more of recency bias where I feel like there's not really much content from Apple besides the fact that they're just buying other projects from other people? But it seems like Apple is not doing a good job of, okay, we sign these deals and then converting those deals to like IP that they developed on their own. It seems that a lot of their biggest hits recently have been we're buying outside IP and then just using Apple TV Plus as a distribution source. Is that a fair assessment?
For the most part, yes. I mean, the thing is, when you look at their initial deals that they had in place, when you look at that table and it says that they had deals with Oprah, Sesame Workshop, Peanuts, there actually obviously was content that released when the service launched. The Leonardo DiCaprio one, that one is unique because they just actually had a project that was announced that we talked about last week called Shining Girls. And the thing is, ultimately, I think it's just like a slow build. I know that it takes time for content to be produced, to be created, and things like that. The Sesame Workshop, that is the deal that they have with them, that one, that created, I think, 2 shows. There is content that is there. It's just a matter of how long will it take to get that stuff out. So those deals that were initially in place in early to mid 2018, they did produce content by late 2019, but all those deals that were put in 2019, we have yet to see really a whole lot of that stuff materialize into actual content. Whether or not the production holds have had anything to do with that or not, that remains to be seen, but we do know that there is obviously content that's out there that's being created. They're also spending, and we've talked about this before, they're spending an insane amount of money with these deals, but if it gets them more content, the more production companies that they're working with in general, there's the possibility of more and more content that they can produce going forward down the line. It's just a matter of getting that content, started. It's just a matter of seeing what happens.
Yeah, you're completely right. I guess I just assumptions make asses out of you and me. That's the saying. My naive assumption was that I would have heard, like, we're pretty in tune with all this stuff. I would have heard more talk about things going into pre-production at Apple TV Plus, of like these series that are in pre-production by these creators. Like, that news does get around and stuff like that. So I guess that was my assumption that, by this time we would have heard more stuff from Apple TV in terms of pre-production news. But COVID-19 kind of happens and it kind of throws the schedules out of whack. And so, yeah, I mean, you're definitely right there.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the list of content that they have announced that is coming, there is a significant level of content that is coming. It's just the issue is that a lot of these seem like very, very high end, and it's going to take a significant amount of time before they can get some of these projects out. There's The Foundation, which we saw the trailer for. That's planned to come out sometime next year. There's the Fraggle Rock reboot that they're doing. We've heard about that one. Just looking over the list, Shining Girls just popped up, so that one just happened. But there's a number of other series that are out there that have been announced that we haven't heard anything about, just because I think nothing's really been happening with them. I think the biggest thing is there's a lot of stuff that they anticipated on getting going very quickly, and it hasn't gotten to that point. There has been a few projects here or there that we've heard casting stuff. Obviously, we don't talk about I want to clarify this in case anybody didn't know this. We don't really talk about the casting stuff. There's a lot of casting information that comes out about projects, but unless it's a new project being announced, I don't tend to include casting announcements because it would just be, we'd have too much. We'd have way too many things to discuss every single week if we were talking about casting. Since that's not really our side of what we're talking about with streaming, it's not something that comes up. So the thing is, like, ultimately, they have content that they're working on, and some of these projects, obviously, like, there's another Oprah series that she's teaming with Prince Harry for a mental health docuseries that's coming at some point. She obviously they just announced that she's doing her, a new talk show. So that, and she did have one during COVID too. So that partnership that they already had in place with her was creating stuff. When you look at some of the children's content with Peanuts and Sesame Street, we haven't heard anything new, but that doesn't necessarily mean, of course, there isn't stuff that they just haven't announced yet either. It's just a matter of finding the right time to announce some of the stuff, because a lot of the kids and animated stuff, like, they don't need to announce it at any point. Like, a lot of times you rarely, unless it's like a big name series like BoJack Horseman or something like that garners a lot of attention, you don't actually hear about it even getting a second season, or until it actually is, there's a second season that's already got a release date. That happens a lot with Netflix, where there's lots of series that are produced specifically for children, not the adult animated stuff, that you don't even hear about them getting another season or them being renewed until after the next season's already coming out. So the biggest thing to take away from this, I think, is that they are stacking the amount of potential content extremely high. They could potentially have a lot of really high quality content coming. It's in the pipeline, and I don't see a lot of it happening until 2022. It's just the service, as we talked about the last couple episodes, more specifically last episode, the service just launched very, very early to make sure that they weren't one of the last ones out the gate, and they just don't have a ton of content. Obviously, COVID has thrown a wrench into everything plan-wise, but ultimately it comes down to when things pick back up, when vaccines are in place and production can pick up steam as much as possible, there's going to be a lot of content coming from Apple, and I think Apple will have the ability to ramp up all very quickly just because of the sheer amount of money that they have. All right, so moving on to Disney Plus. Disney Plus has landed the Black Beauty remake that was originally planned to release in theaters. Now it will be on Disney Plus. Disney has also announced that they are looking to adapt Once on This Island, which is a Broadway musical, specifically not taking a recording. This is a musical that was very popular in the early 90s. They're looking to specifically take that project and develop it into a film for streaming.
I might have an unpopular opinion here, but I wish that they would just kind of basically do it like Hamilton. I thought what made Hamilton unique is I think it's an excellent story, and I love the music and the acting and just all of the performance of it. But I thought what was really cool is that they were able to capture accurately what it would feel like to be at the theater watching it. And it didn't feel cheesy or cheap. It didn't feel like somebody's home camera where they're in the back, the top 3 rows and just filming it on some shaky cam. Like it really felt like a high quality production, but it felt like you were there. And that was kind of something that Hamilton offered the audience. There have been many different adaptations out there for different musicals, and frankly, they're kind of all hit and miss in my opinion, because it's a musical, it should have these certain qualities, but yet in your head you have this mental block of like, you keep imagining yourself at the theater and you're not at the theater, and the concept of upstage downstage just is in your head. You have these different things, but when they play it on the screen, it's just totally different. I feel like personally with the success of Hamilton that they should go more the route of Hamilton style content, of like doing things very well and filming it very professionally, but film it on the stage, film it as it kind of was, and to kind of capture that experience. I feel like that's what audiences want, especially as more people stay at home and more people aren't able to go to theaters. It's if you can kind of recreate people going to theaters, like Broadway theaters and stuff, at home, I feel like that's an added bonus that you can give people, and it's an extra entertainment value of like, hey, look at what we can do, and we're really good at this. I feel like that's something that Disney could really put their name on. I feel like they've done a great job of like redoing like live action retellings of their stories, like all their animated content. I mean, you have the Jungle Book and Lion King and Beauty and the Beast. Like they've done a really good job of bringing that realism to those movies. Now, I think that there's some criticisms that are legitimate about how accurate is it to the animation, or just the acting choices or something like that. Like there's always those discussions, but I feel like overall they did a pretty good job of like transferring from like animation to live action. And I think that they could do like kind of own a similar domain of like, we can film and record theater productions and make it feel like you're at the theater and give it as its pure form of media, but transfer it and allow you to experience that from home. I feel like Disney could really own that, but they're choosing to go different ways. So that's kind of like my unpopular opinion about this, is that I wish that they would just keep it a theatrical version and just let that be, but it's their choice. I've never heard of this musical personally, so I'm kind of curious to see how it's going to turn out, because the premise is very interesting, and I'm glad that it has a big following. But that's kind of like my unpopular opinion for the week of what I think Disney should do.
All right, jumping over to Quibi, there's a show called The Tiny Talk Show that has been announced for the service. Jumping over to HBO Max, HBO Now will still be accessible on Amazon Fire TV via the new HBO app. The surprise, of course, is that Amazon somehow cut a deal so that you could still access HBO through Amazon if you previously had an HBO Now subscription. If you have HBO Go, the only way to access it is through the new HBO app. So again, this can be confusing, obviously, but HBO Go and HBO Now no longer exists. There's only HBO Max and HBO. If you are a cable provider or a cable subscriber and you would like to access HBO on the go, you need to download the HBO app. That is how you access it. Now, certain subscribers are going to have free access to HBO Max given the deals in place with Warner Media and HBO Max and obviously their cable providers, but it's going to vary from service to service. The idea here is that HBO doesn't lose any subscribers who are subscribing to the channels, the HBO channels on Roku or Amazon. They don't lose any subscribers, but at the same time it kind of pushes them towards the idea of trying to get HBO Max because there's no reason to not go for the service that offers more content for the same exact price, even if it isn't, of course, available on those two major services.
I'm glad that this has gotten figured out. I'm glad that former HBO Now users can watch their content on HBO app. I think that's great. For me, what was interesting about this article was basically everything else besides the article. If people didn't know last week as we record, there was a Senate subcommittee hearing with the 4 biggest tech CEOs. But the point was that so all these CEOs were at the Senate subcommittee and they were grilling them about different questions, anti-competitive questions, rulings on potential antitrust violations, stuff like that. And of course, as a Senate subcommittee hearing, things kind of went downhill. There's a lot of derailment, a lot of politicizing. But basically, you have these 4 big companies that are so huge that they pretty much deserve their own committee hearing. But instead, they lumped it all into just one hearing's worth, and it was just a bunch of mess. But it was a really interesting, line of questioning by one of the lawmakers about Amazon and how they brought up the Amazon HBO Max issue and the deal that was going on, and how since Amazon, their words, is considered as a gatekeeper for allowing services on its platform, and it's Roku, Amazon, and then everybody else in terms of like set-top box platforms, so you can watch content on TVs. As Amazon's place as a gatekeeper for this content, if that was an issue for anti-competitive law issues and potential antitrust issues, and if that was like kind of like the main thing going on with the HBO Max deal. And I thought it was really interesting how I like the word gatekeeper, because Roku and Amazon, I think that's a really interesting and I think good way to aptly summarize what they are. They kind of are gatekeepers. And if they're abusing their platform by wanting extra data on the streaming services so they could boost their own offerings, because the Roku channel offers its own content. Amazon Fire, it's got IMDb TV and it's got other things as well to bolster its own library, or maybe collect the data, or maybe try to strong arm and maybe get certain content on their stuff for free. Instead of, the whole point is it was an interesting line of questioning, and it was really interesting to see lawmakers ask this question about Amazon and Amazon Fire, and kind of bring up how maybe those are issues that are impeding this Amazon Fire / HBO Max deal. I would check out the article for that alone if you're interested in that type of stuff. Not everyone is. I thought it was really cool how they were seeing something there, and that may or may not be a reason why that is an issue for some of these deals kind of getting stuck. But it seems Bezos' answer was like, I don't have any specifics on this one instance because he is in charge of the company, but he doesn't run every single negotiation possible. He does know that a deal should be worked out sometime soon, so maybe that's just a cut and paste answer that he was told by his lawyers and his staff to say, or maybe there really is a deal that's coming down the future soon. So either way, there's more news on the HBO Max, Amazon Fire kind of conundrum that's happening.
All right, and then jumping over to Peacock, there is a series called How to Survive Inglewood that is currently in development. And then the NBC Universal / Comcast had their first major quarterly earnings since the national launch, that is, a Peacock. And they have boasted that they have had 10 million signups.
This is, obviously, news about launches is exciting because you get to see just the initial response to a streaming service. So 10 million signups, that's interesting and that's cool, but I'm kind of curious about active users, because there are people that will download the app or subscribe and check it out at one time, but if they don't pick it back up, that really shows that you have something that people want. I think Quibi is kind of like the most recent example of a use case where there were a lot of signups, there were a lot of downloads at the time, but as more and more people started to use the app, even just a week after, you saw usage rates just go down dramatically. So I was a little reticent to hear that the NBC Universal chief was very hesitant to say anything about active users. He said it's too soon to tell, and I feel kind of like it is soon to tell. I feel like they do have those numbers.
my take on this is, I mean, great for them, 10 million signups. However, the problem is that there really wasn't a breakdown of where these 10 million signups are coming from. Now, keep in mind, these quarterly earnings they took place about 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks after the initial national launch. Now, in 2 weeks, 10 million signups is great, but let's all keep in mind that if you were a Comcast or a Cox subscriber, you actually had access to Peacock all the way back from April. So people who had Cox or Comcast were able to get Peacock all the way back from April for free. I mean, that was essentially it. The national launch obviously brings in some more people, but the problem is that they're not breaking down the numbers. You know, how many of those 10 million signups are actually users that are paying for the service? How many of them are actually paying the $5 for the ad version that gets them the original content? How many of those subscribers are premium subscribers who are paying more? The problem is when you have a service that has a free tier, a premier tier, or a premium tier as they put it, and then an ad-free tier, and you don't disclose how many are in each tier, at least, general numbers, but you say you have 10 million signups. I mean, one could assume, I should say, that 10 million signups just means it's, the majority of the signups are people who are getting the service for free, either the free version, because the other part of this is Peacock, you can sign up for without having to give a credit card, without having to do anything. You can sign up just by giving your email. That is considered a sign up, and you have then access to the free content that is available through those 24/7 streaming channels that they have on the service. So the thing is, you don't have to have anything to do it. If you are a subscriber that gets it free from Comcast or Cox, you also just need to give your email. That's it. That's all you have to do. And then based on your user email for your cable services, that gets you the premium level of the one that is the medium tier that Peacock offers. So the problem is that that's the problem. To me, it's not so much about the active users. It's how many of these people are actually paying for the service, because 10 million is a great number to boast about. But if 9.5 million of these users or these signups are not actually paying anything, that's not great for the service. I assume they probably have at least some paying subscribers, because there's obviously people who get it for free from Comcast but then opted for the ad-free version of the service. But we don't know, because they didn't disclose that. And that's my problem with it. I would love to know the active numbers, obviously, as well, but I'm more concerned with how many of these people are actually paying for the service, because 10 million is too big of a number for them to have gained so many followers or so many subscribers just from the time they launched nationally. It's just too big of a number. And let's also keep in mind, they have millions and millions of customers between Comcast and Cox that could be getting the service for free, which is considered a sign up. So that's my issue with these numbers.
You're asking people to tell you the numbers. I mean, what a rookie mistake.
Yeah.
That they would break down their numbers and be as transparent as possible. Come on, you know better than that.
Yeah, nobody wants to.
That's true sarcasm. Well, you wish there were always better numbers.
All right, so jumping over to niche streaming services, Crunchyroll has grown to 3 million paid subscribers globally, and they also have 70 million active users that aren't paying but are active within the Crunchyroll website and app and things like that, because there is a community aspect to that service as well. BritBox has announced that they're going to expand into 25 more countries, and the WWE Network has added subscribers for the first time since 2018. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the WWE Network, obviously WWE is a wrestling company that provides entertainment. They have a service that launched, I believe, in 2016. They gradually grew, and then they kind of plateaued, and then they actually started losing subscribers on a normal basis, and now they finally posted new ones. Now, the one catch, of course, is that they introduced a free version of the app earlier this year, so of course their subscriber count can get boosted up, because they suddenly now have a free tier that offers free content, but you still have to pay to get access to the pay-per-views and the additional content that they deem premium content. But it does show that just the idea of adding a free tier to a service, whether it be ad-supported or not, the idea is you get more subscribers, you can boost that number that everybody wants to talk about, even though they're not disclosing how many of them are actually paying customers at this exact moment. So there's that to keep in mind. It goes back to what I was just talking about with Peacock. All right, so jumping over our main discussion, streaming has dominated the Emmys. No question about it. There is a insane amount of Emmys that have been picked up by streaming services and the companies behind streaming services. Specifically, the big thing here is that Netflix has actually surpassed HBO for the second time in the last couple of years, with a total of 160 nominations. Apple and Disney Plus have also received nominations for their shows. HBO has 107. Now, to be clear, going forward, I'm not going to differentiate between HBO and HBO Max, because anything you can watch on HBO, you can watch on HBO Max. So it's all the same content. So you also see the trailers for that we post on the show notes. They'll include shows that you will be able that are exclusive to HBO, because they're also exclusive to HBO Max. So it's all the same to me. I'm not going to differentiate. So when I say HBO picked up 107, all that content is viewable on HBO Max. So it's very comparable in that way. The leading shows were Ozark, The Crown, Dead to Me, The Politician, and Stranger Things for Netflix. The Watchmen series on HBO was the one that garnered the total most nominations, with 26 total. Last year, HBO bested Netflix, but the year before that, Netflix actually bested HBO. So last year, the reason why HBO boosted back up was because of the Game of Thrones final season. They got a number of extra nominations for that they didn't get the year prior, but now there's no Game of Thrones, so HBO goes back down. And like I said, we have a number of other stuff. The Mandalorian walked away with some. Hulu's walked away with some for The Handmaid's Tale. Apple TV Plus, they walked away with 18 nominations. Disney Plus got 19. Even Quibi was not a service that walked away without any, because they even had 10 for themselves. So while I would argue about the Quibi thing, we'll talk about that in a second. More specifically, let's just put it this way. There's a lot of content that is on streaming services that is, in fact, Emmy nominated now.
Yeah, I was surprised by one of the articles that talk about this. The quote was 86% of this year's nominations do not require a cable or satellite TV subscription. So basically 86% of this year's nominations is streaming related, that you could find it without one of the classic cable providers. And that's kind of huge. And it shows that it doesn't really show anything technically, but it confirms that you can make in other people's eyes, because once again, all awards is subjective, but you can create substantial TV, compelling TV on these streaming services. And there was a big concern with some of the purists who say that streaming actually dilutes television, it dilutes the medium. And I don't think that's true. And I think people have kind of seen through that smoke, and that you can create compelling, great television, diverse television, tell many different stories through streaming. And so just kind of like the old model is just pointless now of how you judge TV, and that it doesn't have to go through the traditional mediums. So I'm excited about that, and hopefully we can see this translate to films, because you had this whole big song and dance of The Irishman trying to be released in the theaters so it could be in through award season. Why can't those awards learn from the Emmys and see you don't have to things don't have to be out through the old ways. They don't have to go out through the old mediums. I mean, frankly, there are going to be many films this year that aren't even going to be able to be distributed through the normal ways that people can actually see the films. And so hopefully that the rest of Hollywood, the rest of the media will transfer and change. And that what's really more important is that more people are able to see the things that they like, the things that they care about, the things that speak to them at their convenience, that they don't have to go somewhere else to have this artificial experience. They can just have a really great experience at home. And I think that's kind of what, these Emmys have shown, is that you can create a great, compelling television that packs a message that is just insightful, thoughtful at your house. You don't have to go pay pay-per-view service, or you don't have to go do something crazy. You don't have to go out to a theater to watch good content. You can watch it at home. And that's what this shows. So that's kind of what I'm taking from this is it's that number, the 86% is compelling. And hopefully that we see this translate into the other areas that are not, that haven't come around to this new age of thinking in terms of streaming and creating content.
So going back to the Quibi thing that I was talking about, there's specific categories that are short form content. There's a outstanding comedy within a short form, and there's drama series with a short form. Personally, I think this is kind of disingenuous. It kind of is a category that seems to be almost geared towards a service like Quibi, where Quibi, as long as they're producing a regular amount of content, there's no way they don't walk away with at least a couple of nominations, because the other contenders out there that would potentially get nominations well, you're talking like YouTube, Snapchat, but even then, I mean, obviously YouTube has their own set of originals and content, but they're even getting away from that now. And then you've got Snapchat. They do a small amount, but Quibi is going to dominate these categories for the foreseeable future because there just isn't a lot of content that would even qualify for these type of awards. So while I appreciate the fact that there are people out there like, oh, good for Quibi because Quibi got 10 nominations. It's like, yeah, but when you look a little bit deeper into the nominations that they received, it's kind of disingenuous to say that type of content is the same on par with some of the other content that the other services are releasing, because it's not. Unfortunately, it's hard to beat around the bush. It's just not up to the same level as it. It's just content that happens to fit a specific category, and that's why it's being nominated. Good for Quibi. They can continue to get nominations for categories that basically appeal to just them, but overall, it doesn't mean the content is Emmy worthy, in my opinion.
I completely agree. Like, it should be the floor that they win these awards, because their competitor, like, there's really no true competition in the market and of where they're trying to be. And like Snapchat, they do have originals, but it's not even the same league. Like Quibi has like it's very well done content in terms of like production quality. That doesn't mean it's like good content, just means it's just well produced. And it's like, at minimum, they should win some of these awards, because if they don't, then they're not really living up to, the brand. Like they are premium short form content. Like it's in on all their media releases of just like who they are. And it's like, if they don't meet these bare minimums, then it's definitely even more of a ripoff. But I agree, it's like great for Quibi, but like in terms of like all of television, if you look at it in whole, it's even trying to like compare as much as you can compare. There's just a big talent gap between like the different things. So your criticism, I think, is definitely sound there.
All right. And then our last discussion for today is going to be something that, like I said, is a little bit outside of the normal realm of streaming, but is streaming related. AMC and Universal, they were going head to head against each other, specifically when it came to PVOD during the major elements of the coronavirus back in April. There was the Trolls film that was supposed to release. Universal announced they were releasing it to paid video on demand. Meanwhile, the theaters in general were very upset by this, because they, of course, wanted the film to release in their theaters. But theaters closed, and a lot of studios took the route of either selling off their movies to either streaming services, as we've talked about at length multiple times, or they went the route of putting it on a PVOD, paid video on demand model, to basically try to make some sort of money back from some of these films. Universal did this with not only Trolls. Trolls was the first one that was strictly and only paid video on demand, but was originally planned for theaters. But they also early released other films that were in theaters when the pandemic started. But there was a total of 3 films that Universal had that released early as well. Obviously, Disney took the route of putting some of their films that released on the streaming service quicker. Onward was one of them that came out at the beginning of March, was only in theaters a couple of weeks before the pandemic hit. Anyway, to get to the point of this discussion, AMC was adamant about how they were opposed to Universal doing this, so much so that they claimed that they were going to boycott every future film from that Universal produced from their theaters, specifically because of this situation that happened during the pandemic. At the time, a lot of people were like, well, that's a weird stance to take, because it's not like you can put the movie out in your theaters to begin with. Nobody was, none of the theater chains were really complaining about films that were originally set to release in theaters going to streaming services. It was more of a, well, they're making money and they're cutting out of the potential money making aspect of it, so of course we're going to have a problem with that. Now we skip forward 4 months later, and we are in a situation now where we have AMC and Universal. They have actually decided to mend their fences per se, and they have decided to lower the exclusivity window for films. So not only will AMC now put Universal films back in their theaters, but they're also lowering the exclusivity window to only 17 days. That means basically if a film comes out on a Friday, you're looking at 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, so the Tuesday typically that films release on digital, will be available for purchase right away. That means that the films themselves can be purchased for a larger sum of money, or, you can watch them for a larger sum of money, similar to the way everything worked out a couple months back with all those paid video on demand films. But my thing is, and obviously other theater chains were kind of ticked about this because they're like, wait, I thought the whole thing was that this was bad for the theater chains. Why is AMC suddenly switching their viewpoint on this? And the answer, of course, lies with a very specific thing. AMC is the only theater chain out there that they have a service out there that allows you to actually rent and purchase films. They own this service. They get a cut of obviously every film that they sell or rent. And when they do that, they actually allow, they get some money off of it. So of course, them lowering their exclusivity window and allowing these paid video on demand films on their service, they are in turn making some money.
I was quite surprised that they got to a deal. I think that AMC had to get to a deal because I don't think they could survive with one of the biggest movie producers not like creating content for them anymore. That's very important. But I think even more so, it was, I think the 17-day window is very drastic change of nature. We never seen a deal like that before. So there was that. I guess from the beginning, I never took the AMC threat seriously, just because if it wasn't like our current situation in terms of like COVID-19 and then us and also AMC being primarily in the States, it's if it wasn't for those factors, like, okay, I'd take the threat more seriously, but like they have no leverage. Like there's been talks of like how many times AMC may or may not go bankrupt. That's in the headlines in the tech circles and the media circles of them potentially going bankrupt, but yet Comcast and ABC Universal is doing fine. Like I guess the threat just never really seemed like it was going to move anywhere, in my opinion. I think it was interesting that they were sharing, paid video on demand revenue. That was quite surprising in my opinion, because I guess in my opinion, I never would have thought that Universal would have surrendered, some of that income. I guess my concern for the future of this deal is that NBC Universal got what they want. A significant reduction in the days that it has to be in the theaters before it can go to paid video on demand and then, streaming service. But I'm worried for AMC because they might have signed this deal, and yes, they're going to get some of that income from the paid video on demand service. But it doesn't seem like, and there might be more language in the contracts, but from like what we can tell, it doesn't seem like there's any mandatory window that paid video on demand, like the movie has to be on paid video on demand. Like it could be that after the 17-day window, you put it on paid video on demand for like one day, and then, hypothetically, NBC Universal could just move that movie to Peacock without just being on the streaming service, and it wouldn't be on paid video on demand anymore, or their paid video on demand offering. However, they're going to work that out. But so then AMC would effectively lose out on that paid video on demand revenue. Now, you could be like, Tony, why would a company forego the paid video on demand window when they could earn a good chunk of money before they put on the streaming service? And it's like, well, maybe they are going to get a cut of that money, but maybe they want to. Sometimes there's more important things than money. Maybe it's because of it's a great marketing ploy and they go straight to like maybe Peacock. It's going to boost their streaming service, or it could be that maybe they really do not like the deal that they have in sharing the paid video on demand money. And it's like, we can eat this cost later but bolster our content library and just put it on the streaming service. Then there's many different reasons why they might want to forego that paid video on demand window, but it doesn't seem like there's any language stating that there has to be a paid video on demand window for that property to kind of go through. And so I can see a situation where they just skip that window altogether and go straight from that 17-day theatrical window straight to the streaming service like Peacock. So, and if that's the case, then this deal is kind of nothing for AMC. They're losing out, but then Universal gets kind of all the benefits. So without some protections there, I'm a little bit concerned for AMC that they might have actually signed an even worse deal than before. But from what we can tell, it doesn't seem like there's any windows for paid video on demand. Do you think that theory, that concern is a big risk for AMC, or is it kind of like I'm just having too big of my conspiracy hat and just going too deep on this?
I think it might be going a little too deep. I think the reality of it is that we've got a situation where, while AMC obviously is the biggest chain in the United States when it comes to theaters, there are plenty of other large chains, and I think the way it's keeping the projects off of streaming, at least for the immediate future, is the fact that these other chains have not signed any sort of exclusivity deal outside of their normal 60-day window that typically most wide release films have. So while AMC might be sitting there saying, yeah, we're okay with the 17-day thing, we're completely okay with you putting it up for sale after 17 days. I think the problem is that obviously the other theater chains are not very happy about that 17 days. They don't have anything to gain from that whatsoever. So there's no reason to sign on for something like that. But at the same time, even without those deals in place, I think that's what's keeping the films from going to streaming right away. Now, is it possible that that streaming is involved in some way with these deals and we don't know about it? Certainly, because I don't think that's the headline there. I think the headline is, in fact, that AMC is lowering, one, that they mended their fences and they're working together again, but also the fact that between the two of them, they're both going to profit off of making projects available paid video on demand in the immediate future. So I'm not going to sit here and say that what your thought about this being a problem or not a problem, but the ability to have Universal use it in a way where it makes more sense for them is completely unjustified, because I think it's entirely possible that something like that could happen. But I don't think that is immediately the concern I would have, mostly because the other part of this is that Universal already has deals in place with HBO where the big blockbuster films that Universal releases, they actually have a deal where they go to HBO before they end up going somewhere else. So I could see, I don't see Peacock benefiting, at least in the immediate future, while those other deals are in place.
That makes sense. I mean, just because some things are in the realm of possible does not make them probable.
Right.
So, and it's very easy to conflate, things that are possible with things that are going to happen. So I just want to bounce the idea off you just to make sure that it's I understand the potential possible concerns, but we're in this business a lot and we see a lot of things and we're pretty skeptical of a lot. So just want to make sure that concerns were not just overdone or whatnot.
All right. So with that is going to be all of the stuff for this episode. There is a number of trailers that have released, including the full trailer for The Boys Season 2, which looks amazing as usual. So check out all those trailers. With all of that being said, that's going to wrap it up for this episode. You can send us an email at thestreamingwars@gmail.com with any questions, comments, concerns, feedback, or topics you'd like us to discuss on future episodes. We always appreciate any reviews that you can put out there wherever you are listening to the show. You can follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter and join our Discord to check out all the articles that we talk about here on the podcast and some that we don't. You can follow us on Instagram for all the latest announcements related to new episodes of the podcast releasing. And with all of that being said, for Tony and myself, continue to stay safe out there, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for listening to The Streaming Wars. Check us out on Twitter and Instagram. Also consider supporting us on Patreon. Links can be found at thestreamingwars.io.